Hi, and welcome to The Purposeful Banker, brought to you by Q2, where we discuss the big topics on the minds of today's best bankers. I'm your host, Jim Young. Welcome to the show. We're taking a break this week from our Gen Z series and turning to a topic that is near and, frankly, not so dear to the hearts of our audience, fraud. With me today to talk about fraud is Jeff Scott. Jeff is the VP for Fraudtech Solutions at Q2, so there's no one better equipped to handle this critical topic. In fact, he's going to be one of the main guests on a webinar we're hosting on November 13th. It's called Building Trust, Not Friction, the Future of Fraud Prevention. We'll have a link to that in the show notes, but you can also find it at hub.q2.com/webinars. Jeff's also the ideas guy behind an ebook we recently published titled Fraud Intelligence, Build Trust, Not Friction. You can also find that at q2.com/solutions/fraud-intelligence. And again, we'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. Okay, after that long preamble, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim. Glad to be here.
All right, well, let's start off with, Jeff, nearly every presentation I see on fraud has at least one section which details how big the problem is and how, in a lot of ways, it's growing. I don't get the sense that bankers need to be convinced that fraud is a problem, but is there a stat or a factoid that, when you put that one out, or maybe when it's been presented to you at some point, that still raises eyebrows when it comes to fraud and its impact on the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Usually what gets the reaction is for every $1 of fraud lost, a financial institution now spends almost $6 when you include investigation, recovery, reputational costs. In 2024, community and regional banks saw more fraud attempts through digital channels than through physical ones for the very first time. And so when you put those two things together, that's usually the thing that gets folks up out of their seat. And they know that fraud is not an occasional disruption anymore. It's really now a daily operating cost. And that's usually the stat that rings true. And it continues to increase. So that stat, a couple of years ago was $3, then it was $4. Now it's $6.
Yeah. And so to your point, it's not just hey, this fraud attempt worked. It cost, we lost this amount of money out of an account. It's this fraud attempt worked and this is going to cost us this much out of an account. It's going to cost us this much in terms of how long it took us to investigate it. It's going to cost us this much because we're in danger of, losing this customer, et cetera. Just a huge ripple effect. Following up on that, then, if generally speaking, again, when you're speaking to bankers, they're nodding along their heads when you're putting out these stats and you're telling them about the need to focus on fraud. What is it that keeps them from really taking the plunge and really investing in better fraud management?
Yeah, it's usually three things. First, I would say is just fragmentation. So banks have multiple point solutions. They don't talk to each other. They sort of sit on their own islands, and that makes it operationally difficult. And it's just difficult to figure out where do we start? I think the second thing is what I would call sort of fear of friction. So no financial institution wants to block a good customer in the name of security. And so catching your good customers in a bad fraud trap sort of keeps them at the sidelines from time to time. And the third one is really just general fatigue, because fraud is evolving so fast that even well-intentioned teams seem to struggle to keep up. So we see institutions, spending more on point solutions and tools, but not getting sort of a unified defense. And then that can keep them from really thinking about it holistically. It's such a fast moving animal and the threat vectors are new and emerging on a constant basis. So sometimes they'll think, well, maybe I'll just wait and I'll see what else comes out. I'll see if there's a better mousetrap, and they sort of stay on the sidelines.
We had a customer, I think you sort of answered a little bit of my next question, which is well-intentioned mistakes that banks make when they're trying to set this fraud management. I'm curious, then I would pivot here to a little bit of a conversation I had with bankers recently where they had a fraud tool that they admitted they'd almost turned off, basically, because they basically said, well, we weren't we weren't catching any fraud. And I said, well, you mean it wasn't effective? And they said, no, we weren't having any fraud attempts in that area. But then suddenly we were. All of a sudden, it caught $700,000 worth of fraud attempts. And so now we're really glad we had it. Do you run across that a little bit too? Which is like, I guess I think of it almost like Homeland Security, where no one really cares about it until they have to really care about it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we're all a little bit victim to the tools and the payment processes that we as an industry have used for the last decade, which is really about batch transactions. You have time to sort through flagged items. We don't have that time anymore. You've got to be able to have a holistic view in real time because of P2P or real time payments. And so I think what happens to financial institutions is they're still so focused narrowly on the transaction and not enough on behavior. And so they're used to catching it at the time of transaction, but it's totally operationally heavy. And maybe they don't catch something, in the recent past, so they think that the tool isn't being effective. But your point about Homeland Security is absolutely right. And when these new and emerging threat vectors pop up and they pop up quickly, it's really about the behavior of the individual and how much can we know about them and how fast inside the session, such that we can stop other forms of, whether it's changing PII or getting to an SSO out that would be something like Zelle.
Gotcha. Okay. So I want to toe the line here between giving folks an idea of what they can expect from your November 13th webinar, but also, without giving away the store here. I don't think I'm giving away too much by saying the focus of the webinar is a concept that we call fraud intelligence. And you've already kind of started touching on some of those themes that are within it. But can you give our listeners essentially maybe the long elevator ride pitch explanation of what we mean when we say fraud intelligence?
Yeah, 100%. So to me, fraud intelligence is a unified, real-time approach to fighting fraud. So it connects every signal. So think logins, transactions, devices, user behaviors across all products, all partners, and turns that data into intelligence that helps a financial institution be able to see their fraud. And so have a single pane of glass of all of the threat vectors, all of their speed bumps that they want to deploy. And it gives them real-time information and the ability to interdict real-time and have all of that in one place. So I think about fraud intelligence as it's just not another fraud tool. It's not another point solution. It's the platform that ties all of those point solutions and tools and processes and data together, such that you can think about it like a 1 + 1 = 3. So if you've got an application for transaction monitoring that's sitting on top of this unified intelligence layer, it should be net smarter because it's publishing signals and consuming signals from that intelligence layer that it wouldn't otherwise have. So across, just using Q2 as the example, across all of our applications, be it from a paper-based positive pay solution, an ACH positive pay solution, our dispute management solution, digital channel tools for events and for login data, for step-up data, and then for transaction monitoring, you've got sort of siloed pieces of information about a user or a fraud event or a mule ring or a fraud ring that's in each of those applications. So we port that data down into the intelligence layer such that any one of those applications can consume that information back into their application. So then you start adding on things like the financial institution has another tool that they use that they want to have access to that data, or a partner is going to partner with a financial institution to build an agent or an application on top of that intelligence layer, and view of that, it makes the whole better.
Okay. All right. I'm put a pin in this because I'm going to play the devil's advocate and have a slight pushback on that. But I want to dig a little bit deeper into this because one of the things that the webinar and the ebook that we published, they share this phrase, build trust, not friction. You talked about it a little bit already, but I wonder if you could expand a little bit on when we talk about that, what do we mean?
Yeah, I think customers shouldn't have to choose between having their account holders feel safe and feeling served, I think is the nexus of it. So we wanted to design a full fraud posture or a fraud defense It really happens in the background. It's using better data. It's got better orchestration. And that allows legitimate users, to move more freely while fraudsters hit the roadblocks and the speed bumps. One of our customers coined this phrase with me that they want to stop catching their good customers in a bad fraud trap. And so they're worried about the friction. And what we're trying to do with fraud intelligence is allow them to do more things for their customers. So if they want to get to a place where commercial customers can do real-time payments, they tell us that the number one thing that's holding them back is not the functionality of real-time payments, it's the fraud mitigation tools. And are they up to snuff? And are they there yet? And that in real-time payments is going to be about real-time information about the user, about the journey, and being able to orchestrate that information in such a way that we can risk score it in enough time. And I like to quote this stat of you've got basically 27 seconds from the time somebody logs in before they can do something you don't want them to do. And the only way you're going to do that is with an ingestion of a bunch of signals. And so our customers, in order for them to not catch their good account holders in a bad fraud trap, they've got to have that plethora of information. The other thing that I was with a customer a couple of weeks ago, we're trying to sort of talk to them about their full sort of fraud defense, monitoring their fraud stats. When we looked at their stats, they had dramatically decreased. And we were like, wow, how'd you do that? And they're like, well, we just shut everything off. So they just didn't let their customers use Zelle. They didn't, and they're dealing with all this operational burden and customers calling in and upset. And that's the opposite of what we want to be able to solve here.
Yeah, that is a bit extreme. Yeah, I guess, for me, just on a personal level, the little thing that I think about is my bank, not naming names here, every time I want to log in, it wants to send me the push notification to my wife's phone text. So she's in the house, cool. She can holler upstairs and give me the number that I need to fill in. If not, I got to find her. Maybe she's not available. Then I can't log in. And that sort of thing drives me up a wall. Not enough for me to switch bank accounts, but if I was a major customer having to do something time sensitive, it might be enough. And again, it's one of those things of is there some way that you can make this trust me that it's me at this point? What else can I give you? What other signals can I give you that doesn't require you to do that every time? Or can you make it a little bit better so that you send it to me and my wife? Is that okay? That sort of thing. So
on that point, we're getting to this world where secure access codes or those one-time passcodes that get sent to mobile, it's becoming archaic. That's the friction we're talking about, where the financial institution will say, well, we don't have any other options right now except to ding everybody with a step-up authentication code to their phones. That's all we have. And so in order to get around that or to not have to do that, we need to authenticate you in a different way. With the amount of signal that's available that we can now ingest in a very fast fashion, and then you start to put on top of that, what we can do, with AI, et cetera, there's an opportunity to say, is this really Jim? Because he's walking at a gait that isn't really his with this device, or he's not going to the screens in the digital channel in the same fashion that he usually does, which maybe means it's not really him. And so there's all kinds of better signals that we can adjust, that we can get around just having that be the only method of defense.
Yeah. I want to also talk about this framework that we use to describe fraud intelligence in action. I'll be the first to admit, as a marketer here, it's marketing, but it's quick, and it's saying it's called see it, stop it, solve it. I think people might be able to get a pretty decent guess, at least on the first two, but can you kind of take us through, our listeners, through that framework?
Yeah, sure. Just trying to keep it, not that it's simple to solve fraud, but it's really around.
I know you can go deep.
around these three steps, So yeah. See it to me means you're detecting anomalies in real time. You're using, sort of talking about all these signals. You're using behavioral analytics, device intelligence across the ecosystem. So we don't have that visibility today. So back to the siloed point solutions, they don't talk to each other. We can't see it. We need that single pane of glass that gives us all that information about the user so that we can decide what speed bumps we want to introduce or what we do with this particular session. So stop it is then the next step of, it's the trigger. It's the active interdiction. It's automatically holding something or challenging risky activity before the user can go to a next step of the process that could be potentially damaging, like we talked about, which might be like changing a beneficiary, changing PII, or getting to a transaction. So Solve It covers the back office. So it's resolving disputes, faster with automation and compliance sort of built in. What we talked about at the beginning, that for every $1 of loss, which is what you're really doing with like See It and Stopping It, the solving it adds the additional $5 to get you the $6, which is like the reputational hit, the amount of people that have to be involved, the research you have to do, maybe the expense of like multiple different like independent solutions that don't talk to each other is adding to that expense. So solving it is the last mile, but probably one of the most important when it does happen. That's where all the expense is coming in. So together, those three steps turn fraud management from reactive cleanup into a more proactive posture.
So, all right, I told you before to put a pin in it. I was going to have sort of my devil's advocate pushback on this. So here it goes. I mean, everything you've sort of outlined to here for me makes sense. There's no massive logical leaps. No offense, but you haven't blown my mind with any of this at all. A lot of it's like, yeah, okay. But then I think if I'm in a bank and I'm in, say, Treasury, and I'm like, well, that's great, Jeff. My job is to deal with ACH fraud. So all this massive stuff of connecting systems and big views and all that, don't really care. Just need a good positive pay solution. And again, maybe to go back to that Homeland Security thing, it feels a little bit like FBI solves this problem, CIA solves this problem, that sort of thing. Don't really know, it's hard to get those things to work together. So I guess, what do you say to a banker who is like, great concept, just need this solution, basically? And how often do you run across that sort of pushback or objection?
Yeah, I think the thing I would say is, most existing systems were built around single use cases. So to your point, ACH monitoring here, login security there. And our experience running these as point solutions, from time to time, they can generate more alerts than answers. And I think fraud intelligence like unifies them. So go to positive pay. So imagine if we had data in the intelligence platform that would help determine that what has been changed about this check is actually part of a fraud ring. And we've got that data. We can use it real time as our AI technology is like scanning that check. It's pulling that information. And then conversely, if we've got that information about that account or about a bad actor from the positive pay solution, what if we could use that in the digital channel? And so I think, to me, fraud intelligence has several use cases that would be advantageous to even just a point solution. And that is making that point solution net better by giving it additional signal. Then you can have apps talk to each other, like positive pay to your digital channel solution. And then the holy grail, and where this would be headed, is then you can start to build agents on top of that data to say, what if we could help your back office positive pay administrator to do their job way faster and with much more accuracy, and to help your commercial customers to be able to scrub their queues in a much faster fashion and be able to figure out which checks they want to return and which ones they want to let pay. So that's how I answer that.
Jeff, much like a very good fraud intelligence system, you are staying one step ahead on this. And you basically went right into my last question on here, which, when you said the word agent, AI is the thing that immediately pops into mind. And look, let's be honest, you can't talk about anything today without AI getting added somewhere. And fraud is no exception. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit, and you had addressed a little bit with that sort of use case about, but I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, when we're talking about AI with fraud intelligence, where it can make an impact, but also maybe where it can be a little bit of a distraction if you're not careful.
Yeah, 100%. So we've been using AI for a decade now in machine learning, really. It started as rules-based, like boost machine learning. What's new is generative and LLM, and then what you can do with an agent on top of that. And AI is phenomenal at pattern recognition. And so that helps reduce false positives. And so our enhanced pay match in our positive pay solution, as an example, uses explainable AI to catch altered checks with much more accuracy than we had in the old OCR scanning technology, which is cutting down, a ton of operational burden, a bunch of unnecessary reviews, etc. I think we're at this precipice of AI can no longer just be a black box model, which I think is what it was for the last decade. Model risk management, transparency, they matter just as much now, especially for banks and, their audits, etc., and credit unions. I think we treat AI as an assistant, not as autopilot, and it will be an amazing augmentation to this entire sort of end-to-end process of pulling in a bunch of signals, being able to recognize patterns within those signals to produce a sophisticated risk score. And then from a workflow standpoint, being able to take that information and maybe for your back office employee at the financial institution, the agent can do a ton of the work and get you to the 5-yard line. And then you can take it the rest of the way there. That allows you to spend much more time on more valuable sort of fraud fighting things, or thinking about the strategy, or looking at the single pane of glass that we've created with all the fraud signals in one place so that you can fine tune your policies, et cetera, on the front end. So we just see an infinite amount of potential use cases. And back to the fraud intelligence platform, it's intra app, and then it's apps talking to each other, and then it's being able to build agents on top that can roam throughout those applications and be able to facilitate work or jobs to be done, essentially, that helps the end customer or helps the financial institution themselves and from a back office perspective.
Yeah, that's great. And I would encourage our listeners, if they haven't already, Corey Gross, you mentioned Pay Match, and Corey Gross, one of our AI geniuses here at Q2, presented on sort of what we did with AI to improve Pay Match, and he did that at Connect. And we've got a blog post on the site. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Really, where he kind of goes through and outlines like the whole thing of like AI is a tool. It's not an end. So think about it again. You rolled through a lot of those use cases. Think about the use cases and then figure out where you can apply it, and
totally
then sit back and let I don't want to say magic because that's what some people think of it as, but just let it do its work.
Yeah. Well, even on that point, Jim, so that team that built the enhanced pay match tool, we gave them a use case. We gave them a problem. Like, we've got this problem. There's probably a way that one of your tools can solve it. And they did. Then we said, okay, that same team with those same set of tools, we're like, all right, what we're really doing is we're looking for patterns. What can we know about this, and how quickly can we determine an anomaly from what we thought it should be? So we're like, where can we apply that same tool? And so one of the things that we're working through right now is going back to the ingestion of all those signals and looking at our customers' confirmed cases of fraud. We'll have financial institutions say like, hey, we had an event. Here's how it happened. We document that, gave it to that team as a use case and said, here's an account takeover pattern that we're seeing. They took that same tool for enhanced pay match, and now they're pointing at account takeover pathways. And so such that when somebody logs in and they go to this specific set of steps, within seconds, that model can detect that this is likely account takeover or business email compromise or any of the number of fraud journeys that are really, really hard to detect. And it's amazing, the results. So we took a financial institution that had a certain amount of confirmed fraud over the last year. They gave us all their data. We put it into the tool, and within 95% accuracy rate, this model found all of that fraud to within dollars of what they had lost. And so that's the power of AI. So now if we can take that and put it at the front end of the process and say, hey, as we sort of like we did with Pay Match, like as we scan the check, like let's have the model react in real time. That's what we're working towards at the front end of fraud intelligence. And then that gets back to why you want this shared intelligence layer that has information from all these point solutions and partners and financial institutions, because the more you can feed that model, the more fraud we're going to detect. And then the more fraud we detect, the cycle continues, because we're like, all right, there was some stuff that got through. We've got those confirmed cases of fraud. It makes the entire ecosystem better.
Yeah, great job of tying it back in there with that sort of flywheel concept on that. Well, listen, I could listen to you talk about this sort of topic for hours, but I don't want to hog you. I want to make sure everyone else gets a chance to listen to you go in depth on it again on our November 13th webinar. But Jeff, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, Jim, thanks for having me. That was fun.
And again, a reminder to register for that webinar. It's called Building Trust, Not Friction, The Future of Fraud Prevention. It's on November 13th. Just go to hub.q2.com/webinars, and you'll see it right there, and you can sign up. And that'll do it for this episode of The Purposeful Banker. Another reminder, please share your feedback on our podcast content on q2.com/pod survey, all one word. And you can subscribe to the show wherever you like to listen to podcasts, including YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and you can see an archive of our past shows at hub.q2.com/podcast. You can see I'm throwing out a lot of hub.q2.com links, so I encourage you to go there in general and explore. Until next time, this is Jim Young. You've been listening to The Purposeful Banker.